Hello, everybody. Sorry for the delay and a very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us today. I hope all of you are doing really well and taking good care of yourselves and your dear ones. Today, we bring you the fifth edition of our online workshop series. We have changed gears slightly today. Till now, we were talking about manuscript writing, research ethics, and communication of your research. However, now we switch to science communication, but beyond publication. This workshop aims to highlight the need for communicating your science to non-experts and its value. The workshop consists of 2 sessions where the trainers will discuss the craft of writing and speaking about your science to a non-specialist audience and how these skills can be used by you to increase the visibility and impact of your research. My name is Hina. I'm Communications and Public Engagement Consultant at the DPT Wellcome Trust India Alliance, and I'll be your host for today's workshop. Before we move ahead, I would take a quick minute to introduce you to the organization that I represent, the DPT Wellcome Trust India Alliance. India Alliance is an independent, dynamic public charity registered in India that funds research in health and biomedical sciences. It is funded by the Department of Biotechnology, Government of India, and the Wellcome Trust in UK. India Alliance invests in transformative ideas and supportive research ecosystems to advance discovery and innovation to improve health and well-being. Apart from funding research, we fund various programs that promote various international and national collaborations, professional skill building workshops, and also programs on strengthening research ecosystem in India. We aim to promote science education, awareness, and public engagement with science in India. You can find more about our fellowships, grants, and other events and workshops on our website, which is displayed on the screen below. You can also follow us on social media through the handles that we have listed on the screen at the bottom. India Alliance periodically conducts one-day science communication workshops that we call SciComm 101 throughout the year at different institutions around the country. This was pre-COVID. And once the lockdown struck us, we shifted to these online workshops. The goal ultimately is to sensitize young researchers about the importance of written and oral communication skills in not just advancing your careers, but also in building public's trust and support for science. You may be doing some fantastic and cutting edge research, but if you're unable to communicate your work, it ultimately is not of much good. It is important to understand that these professional skills that you learn during your academic life are not important just in academics, but will also come in handy in any career that you pursue at a later stage in your life. It is also important to remember that attending one workshop might not be enough to make you an expert in science communication, but what is really important is that you put these learnings into practice. We hope that you find today's workshop useful and will participate actively. Before we move on to further details of the workshop, we are the facilitators and organizers of the workshop. From the India Alliance team, it's me and my colleagues Banya Kar, Yukti Arora, and Sara Iqbal. And from our knowledge and training partners, Editage, we have Neha Pyas, who helped organize and facilitate this workshop. Before we begin, a few housekeeping matters. So video and microphone of the attendees will remain switched off during the webinar. You can always ask questions though in the question box on the right. The webinar is being recorded, so if any of your friends miss out on today's session, they can always follow the webinar through the recording that we'll later post on our YouTube channel. If you have a question, please start the statement with question in capital letters. If you have a comment, please start it with comment in caps. This will help our moderators sort through your comments and questions. You can type these in the chat box on the right-hand side. In case the webinar ends abruptly due to a technical glitch, you can join back using the same unique joining link that you used in the beginning. Please note that e-certificate will be issued only to those of you who attend the entire workshop and submit the post-workshop survey form. You will receive the certificate within 5 to 6 working days. In case you wish to share your experience of the workshop on social media, we would encourage you to tag us using the handles that you can see at the bottom of this page. Moving on to the agenda for today's workshop, we are done with the introduction and introduction to India Alliance. 10 to 25 would be the session for popular science writing for researchers. We would take a quick 5 minutes screen break and then go on to the session 2, which is about communication skills for researchers. And at the end, we'll have the question and answer session for all both the sessions combined. So this is the last half an hour of the workshop. A quick introduction to our workshop trainers. We have Shane Ridquist and Shivani Shah with us today. Shane is going to take the first session, which is about popular science writing for researchers. This will be followed by the second session by Dr. Shivani Shah. On that note, I would like to invite Shane, who has over 5 years of experience in language editing, scientific communication, and publishing. He has personally edited over 1,000 manuscripts across various subject areas in life sciences, collaborating with over 7,500 researchers to help them realize their dream of publishing in high impact factor journals. He strongly believes that every researcher deserves to have their work read, cited, and valued by the larger scientific community. Seeing a researcher's hard work come to life through creative visualizations is what Shane looks forward to the most in his workday. With this, I hand over to Shane. The stage is all yours. Thank you.
Can everybody hear me clearly this morning? All right, I'm just going to switch on my webcam very shortly to say hi. I'm speaking to all of you from Mumbai. I'm hoping most of you are based out of India right now. All right, so I'm going to switch off my microphone because we have to preserve bandwidth, right? So, before we get started, right, I'm going to share a poll with the entire group, right? And here it is. I don't know if you folks can see it. There it goes. It's on live. It's on live. So I'd like you folks to just take the poll that I have just shared with everybody. Okay, that's very interesting. I have 196 answers so far out of 421 attendees. But I can see a trend more or less. I'm going to give everybody 2 more minutes to take the poll. And trust me, your answer will help me a lot through this entire session. Awesome. So I think I've gotten a gist of how everybody feels about this particular question. When it comes to telling your friends and family about what you do in the lab, and friends who are probably not part of the scientific fraternity, uh, it's really, really, really difficult, isn't it? It's extremely difficult to talk about what you do in science, right? And in this session, right, I'm going to maybe try to help you sort of demystify that in some way, shape, or form, right? I'm going to help you understand what it takes to just convert your science into a format where everybody can understand it and everybody can see the value of it, right? I think Hina has done a really good job of just introducing me to all of you. I had quite an interesting journey. My career, I started out as a researcher, like most of you. I did work in the Department of Plant Molecular Biology in Delhi University South Campus for a year and a half. I was pretty hell-bent on doing my PhD as well. But I always had an interest for writing. It was in my first semester at my master's course where I actually began helping some of my so-called PhD seniors with some of their writing work. And That's where I had an interest for it. And I applied as a freelancer to help edit manuscripts. And there I landed up editing and reviewing a lot of manuscripts. I then worked as a managing editor and I trained people for some time. And in my most recent role, which is currently the head of delivery operations for this unit called Impact Science, I've overseen close to 7,000 projects over the last year alone, where we have helped communicate the research of individuals in terms of institutes. We make films for different institutes. Like, for example, recently we've been working on creating a documentary for the Homi Bhabha National Institute, right? Just to help them communicate their mission to students all over the world. So I've spent quite a bit of time looking at research manuscripts, right? And I've spent quite a bit of time simplifying research manuscripts, or at least converting them into a format that makes it easy for people to understand, what the research is about and why it really matters, right? So my first question, right? What is effective research communication? What is effective research communication? And I can illustrate this to you with a very, very simple example. Do you remember this? Okay. So I saw one no and I saw quite a few yeses. All right. Okay. But compare this, compare this to this perhaps. Isn't this the thing you remember first? Right? And that's the key. That's the key. The thing is, when scientists talk, all right, it's all jargon. It's all jargon. You're talking about it in methodologies, you're talking about it in specific protocol related aspects, right? We don't really, because, and I understand the reason why. The reason for that is pretty obvious, right? We dedicate a very significant chunk of our life, all right, towards specializing, right, towards specializing in a particular thing. We spend a good 5 to 7 years specializing in a given field. I can see some of you saying you cannot hear anything. Am I audible to everybody now? All right, that seems to be the case. Okay, so yeah, so when scientists talk, essentially, when scientists talk, it's all about jargon. And I know why that's the case. When I was doing my research, I spent on certain days close to 20 hours in a laboratory, right? And I dedicated my entire time towards being able to specialize in one specific thing. I remember I dedicated a good 6 to 8 months of my life just making sure that I understood how exactly a particular molecular pathway worked, right? And I was surrounded by people at that time who were just as dedicated towards what they were doing, right? And we all spoke each other's language. It's like you live in a different world altogether. The lab is a completely different world. You don't have to really go back and explain something to someone, right? You specifically, for example, you don't even have to mention the bacterial strain to somebody. They know what you're talking about. Or you can just use a particular abbreviation somebody understands, right? But for example, in recent times, for example, I'll give you an example. If you have to come to, say, Maharashtra from any other state from 5 other states in the country, you have to get an RT-PCR test done, right, to detect whether you have COVID or not, right? For me, like the moment somebody says RT-PCR, like the snap of a finger, I know what they're talking about. I know exactly what the mechanism of that test is probably, right? I know exactly how it's going to detect whether I have any virus particles in my system or not. Right, but to people outside, that's such a massive term. Everybody's confused about what is RT-PCR. Why do they want me to do RT-PCR? And that's because, like I said, I've realized now that the world I was in at that particular point in time as a researcher, it made me feel dedicated towards what I was doing, right? And all of us are right to feel entitled to just use that language, right? But the problem is that that sort of language isolates us. It doesn't allow us to really communicate our work to a larger audience. And I'll give you an example. Can you folks tell me what this paper that you can see is all about? Could you just roughly tell me? Just have a look. Absolutely, right? But why? But how would you know this? You would know this. You would know this, right? You would know this because you would understand clearly what the format of a paper is. You would understand what exactly it's your domain specifically, right? A couple of you saying that this is something for Covaxin. It's not really Covaxin or Covishield. This is actually the paper that was published by the Oxford AstraZeneca group in the United Kingdom. Yes, they have collaborated with us to produce Covishield, right? But this is the original report that was published, right? And the thing is, only we can understand this. Only we can understand this. What does the general public understand this as? The general public understands this as this is the vaccine that has what 70% efficacy, right? And it works for 70% of the cases as per the last phase of clinical trials, and it is now being utilized in the UK and in India and certain other countries as well, right? Whereas if you look at say the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine, that has like a 90+% efficacy towards being able to treat COVID, right? So we understand this because we understand exactly what we're looking at in a research paper. You don't realize it, but you are so-called subconsciously wired towards understanding what you're looking at in a paper. You know that, okay, if I'm looking at the title, I know exactly what to read to understand what somebody is saying. I know where I'm going to find the key facets of the study and even the abstract. If I'm reading a paper, for example, in my experience of reading papers, I just skip the first half of the introduction, right? I go straight to the bottom paragraph because that tells me exactly what I need to know about the paper. But imagine taking a research paper to anybody else, to anyone from the lay audience. They're not going to understand, right? And because scientific writing teaches us, all right, to be sort of stale, to use sort of indomitable, decipherable language with vague language and a passive voice and countless equations, right? And overly constructed borderline run-on sentences that seem to drag on and on and on. Like I in my lifetime have seen so many times, and I used to write like this. I used to sit down and I used to write like 3-line sentences to make a particular statement about a particular hypothesis, right? And that's because that's all we've read. Scientific writing, whatever papers we've read, all our favorite papers are all written like that. One sentence drag put on top of another. And yes, in some cases that is justified. You cannot split that sentence up because that thought that is being communicated in that sentence is necessary, right? But for general conversation or to communicate that to a sort of larger audience, it's not easy. It's not going to help anybody understand what you want to do or what you're trying to say. And my question then is, the counter question then is, if you've made a discovery and you write it in that traditional format, all right, and you only publish your paper, is that enough to make a difference? And I'm asking this question quite openly to everybody in chat. Is that enough to make a difference? No, it is not. No, it is not. And I'm glad all of you are saying this, right? And the next thing, of course, is paradoxically, if you communicate your science, okay, and only very few people understand it. For example, the journal editor and the peer reviewers understand what you're saying, right? Has it really been communicated well? Not really, right? And this is where a lot of us struggle because we'll sit in the lab, we'll fill up our logbooks with all the protocols, we'll sit down and we will read a bunch of papers, and then we'll figure out how exactly we'll figure out how exactly the what do you call it, the paper should flow, and we write it down. But the moment we have to make a presentation about our study, all of us get stage fright, right? All of us get stage fright. And it's because, like I said, we don't know how to speak outside that jargon, that world that we've built around us, right? So the first thing that you have to adopt, the first thing that you have to, and this is a mindset change for all of you as researchers, all right? Don't look at it as a protocol. Don't look at it as a study. Think of it as a narrative, because modern science communication and publication, one thing it sorely lacks is a narrative. You have to give it a narrative. If you realize that all the famous scientific discoveries that you remember, all right, barring just leave all the leave all the technical stuff, leave all the academic stuff that you've learned, you've acquired, everything, if you remember clearly, it all has a narrative, right? If you think about, say, the discovery of the double helix by Jim Watson, no, I wouldn't say Jim Watson. I would say a bulk of that work was probably done by Rosalind Franklin and Francis Crick, who was able to interpret that work, and then Jim Watson jumped on, right? Right. So if you think of that discovery of the double helix, all right, how do you remember it? You remember it as this sort of exciting thing where Francis Crick and Jim Watson were talking to each other in a pub, and that's how I was introduced to it. I was introduced to that Jim Watson travels all the way to the UK, tries to meet people to find out about this discovery, and there's Francis Crick, who is trying to he's competing with a bunch of other folks in different parts of Europe to kind of crack this structure of DNA, and then they chance upon this thing that Rosalind Franklin has, and then they go live with it. They write this nice paper, and it's not even a research paper; it's a hypothesis paper, right? And they write about it, and there is this wonderful narrative that helps you remember this entire story of how this double helix was discovered. All right, but then when you actually read Francis Crick's paper, where he's gone ahead and described it, right, and how he has come to those conclusions, that's not very friendly to a lay audience, right? That's something you need a couple of years in molecular biology, right, and a good understanding of biochemistry to understand clearly, right? So a lot of interesting comments coming in as I'm talking about this right now. I will definitely respond to some of them, right? So yeah, what you need to first think about, and I'm telling you this after you publish, right? So think about this after you publish. Now, till the time you publish, all right. Think about it in terms of high impact factor journal. I have to make sure my everything is in place. I've covered all my bases in terms of my submission. Think about it in that way. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. No fault in that, right? But yes, once you finish the publication and you're thinking about communicating your science, you have to think about the narrative of your science, right? And narratives in science have been around for a really long time, all right? And you need to adopt them because the rush in terms of modern scientific publishing is huge, all right? Do you know how many papers are published on a daily basis in impact factor journals? Can anybody give me a number? Like, guess how many papers are published daily on a daily basis? Medha says 10, someone says 1,000, 500, 15,000, someone says 7,000. A lot of hundreds there. Okay. So the actual official figure, as per the STM report, which came out around 4 years ago, I'm guessing the more recent number will definitely be higher. Every day, in just impact factor journals, when I say impact factor journals, I mean I'm talking about journals that are listed in Reuters impact factor list, by the way, which have an impact factor. There are, in those journals alone, there are 3,000 manuscripts that are published every single day. 3,000. All right, which includes the high impact factor journals as well, right? So in amidst all of that, how does somebody's science get discovered? How does somebody find out, right? How does somebody find out what your research is about unless you tell them about it, unless you tell them about the publication, unless you talk about your publication, right? And that is, again, I sort of circle back to the whole aspect of making sure that you think about what the narrative of your science is, what the narrative of your discovery is, right? And have these narratives existed in the past? Yes, of course they have. If you notice, and like I mentioned earlier, every major scientific discovery that you know of, if you think about it, if it reached the public domain, if the major scientific discovery reached the public domain, it's because somebody gave it a narrative along the way. And these narratives they generally tend to take these sort of molds, right? It'll be a story of scientific discovery, right? Like I said, in the case of the DNA double helix, or even say Isaac Newton and theory of gravitation, somebody's inspiration towards research, how they felt about, how they thought about, studying a particular thing, the fact that they discovered something to help solve a problem, story, and then some people talk about a discovery. They just talk about the discovery and how the discovery changed people's lives, right? And of course, how there was a so-called in a lot of cases, and this is a very common term I heard when I was in the lab. They would talk about the race, right? That there'd be one group, and I mean, I was in a lab that was doing research on on the rice genome. So most of the labs we were competing with are most of the labs that we were competing with at the time were in Japan, right? So we were constantly in the race with those labs in Japan to make sure that our research was published first, otherwise we'd lose that race. So again, the story of the race is one that's often sort of picked up. Somebody asks me, what is the website from which you've taken 3,000 manuscripts? This is part of the STM report. I can go ahead and I can maybe share that with you guys separately. It's pretty openly available, the STM report. It's a report that gives you an overview of all published manuscripts across the STEM fields. And it comes out every few years. So in that report, I think the average number was around 3,000 a day. STM, T for Tom, STM, right? Okay, so moving on. So yes, so these are the different molds. These are the different molds in which science is communicated. I mean, in the kind of narrative form that it takes, it tends to take on these sort of molds, right? So why adopt the narrative, right? You adopt the narrative because it sort of allows for the presentation of your scientific information. It allows for the presentation of your scientific information in a non-traditional format. It allows, because the moment you start thinking about narrative, you're forced to kind of shift a few things. You're forced to shift a perspective, and so called place your science in a mold that will make sense in that entire narrative, right? Moving on. So why is this important? Why is this important for everybody? It's important because traditionally you will conduct research, write a paper, publish, end of story, move on to next piece of research, right? Single format communication, only one-way communication, and limited engagement, right? The only people you will ever talk to directly about your study will be your lab mates, or maybe some people in your institute, all right, or if you collaborate with another institute, those folks. And then, of course, once you go into the whole publication cycle, you're speaking to the journal editor and the peer reviewers. Yeah. But if you adopt, say, enhanced content formats, right, to communicate your research through a narrative, you reach many, many, many more people, right? And I think that's something that distinguishes the good scientists or the good so-called researchers from the great ones. The great ones are the people who can take their science and talk about it in across different forums, right? They will, and if you see this is a culture that's picked up pretty well in the West, right? Researchers are extremely good at talking about their research on LinkedIn, on Twitter. Twitter, for example, is the haven for academics in the West, right? They spend a lot of time tweeting about their research. They spend a lot of time debating on Twitter. They reach out to people on LinkedIn. They have Facebook pages. They blog about their research, all right? And of course, in China, a lot of them are trying to make headway by promoting their research on WeChat, right? And of course, there's YouTube, and some people even talk about their research on Instagram, right? There are a couple of folks, at least now, and this is something again in terms of academia, right? In terms of academia, uh, this is catching on just now. But if you look at a field like pharma or big pharma, right? There are literally influencers. They're called KOLs, or key opinion leaders, like literally doctors who are sort of roped in to talk about a particular drug or to give their opinion on a particular disease, which in turn sort of links up. So that ecosystem in a way already exists in say the whole pharmaceutical field, right? But it's one that kind of is only sort of trying to catch on now with academia. And the key is to kind of engage with people through different content formats, and I'm going to elaborate on what those different content formats are. But yes, before I move on to that, what you must remember, and again, the bottom line of this is this: any advancement in science and technology, right, towards improving the life we have, it can only be made through communication, right? And that communication has to happen to the public and a collaboration between science and the public. Every single sort of technological or say lifestyle related convenience you have it has come through a breakthrough in science and technology. Right. And it has happened because there was somebody who thought about how the value of that research could be communicated to the people who could fund it, take it forward, apply it, do something with it. You're seeing, of course, the value of science communication now. In my opinion, the pandemic has done a lot of bad things to the world. We no denying that, right? But one of the things that it has done really well, it has again gone back and re-emphasized the importance of focusing on science, focusing on research. All right, and also it sort of goes back and kind of it just goes back and sort of reemphasizes that in this era of fake news, scientists need to be heard. Research needs to be heard, because with research and with science, you are not really talking about something that's debatable. It's fact, it's the truth, right? But that truth needs to be communicated. It needs to be communicated regularly, because otherwise the whole internet is flooded with things that are untrue, right? We are still in the middle of a pandemic, and people are debating whether a mask needs to be worn or not, or public, worn or not in public, in some parts of the world. So that's why it's important. It's important that things move forward, and things will only move forward when science is communicated to the public, when the public sees the value of what's being done in science, right? And again, it is important to communicate and engage with the public, because that gives you a stronger footing, right, in terms of being accountable for the funds that you have utilized to conduct that research. Because at the end of the day, we have to remember that our research is funded by public, by the public itself, right? The citizens of this country pay for the research that we do, right? So being able to communicate that research to them, it kind of puts you in a stronger footing. And the other thing is that, whether you realize this or not, in the European Union, in the United Kingdom, there is something called the Research Excellence Framework, REF. You can look this up. It's called REF, Research Excellence Framework in the UK. And the Research Excellence Framework in the UK demands that you as a researcher demonstrate what the impact of your research has had on the general public. What impact has your research had on society? It's something that you have to communicate to a panel, and that panel can then sort of disburse a certain part of your funds specifically, right? So whether we like it or not, even the governments now today are mandating, right, that we communicate our research to the public and demonstrate what the impact of our science has been, right? So yeah, moving on to circle back to my point. Publishing alone in a one-way format, not good enough anymore. And where do we see the hints of that? We see the hints of that not from based on what I'm saying, right? The thing is, I saw this myself when I looked at what publishers were doing. Nature, Elsevier, Wiley, all of them, all the big publishers, all of them are now reaching out to their journals and telling them that you need to think about alternate formats in being able to communicate research. Right. Two reasons. Firstly, because journals are now competing with one another for people's submissions. They are competing with one another for people's publications. In addition to that, we are today finally moving into a realm of inclusivity and diversity. Right. The way science is right now communicated, the traditional format of science communication, it was something that was set up a very long time ago by a bunch of people who were not maybe a fair representation of the entire world, right? The way we communicate science is largely unchanged from what it was like in the 1400s, for example. All right, it's just taken on a different form. The techniques have changed, but the way we communicated, the format in which we communicated, the research paper, that has more or less remained unchanged since the 1400s, right? But is that the most inclusive way to communicate science? And this is a question I'm throwing open to all of my listeners right now, right? Do you think that communicating science to a research paper is the most inclusive way to communicate science? Probably it's debatable. It's debatable, right? It's probably not, right? And I think journalists today and publishers today understand that, which is why, for example, the other day I spoke to somebody from the New England Journal of Medicine, and then they kind of told me that they want to now invest in creating videos for all their research papers, because they wanted anybody who visits the site, anybody to visit the site, to just click on the video and understand what the research is about, because that is what makes science inclusive, right? Yeah, so that is what makes science inclusive, and that's what we have to kind of focus on, right? So yeah, so publishers themselves are now investing in alternate content formats, right? And they are going on social media, right? They are setting up their own pages. They are trying to engage with people on Twitter, right? They are trying to kind of help people, connect with them on a so-called sort of scientific level, to kind of engage with these people. So publishers themselves now realize that you can't sit on your high stool and just accept submissions and then hope to survive. You have to engage in content formats. You have to make science more inclusive, and that is when people will kind of, that is when more people want to submit to your journal. In addition to that, a lot of people also, what do you call it, a lot of journals now realize that along with the publication, if you give an author, say for example, a free infographic, or you give them a free video along with their submission, then it acts as a really nice freebie. So they kind of give that away to researchers as well, to sort of lure them in. So this is how the so-called paradigm is shifting little by little. Every single year, I see it shift even further in terms of publishers taking an interest in alternate content formats. And of course, some of you in the chat have said that, firstly, in a country like India, this sort of thinking of, communicate your science in an alternate format is rarely encouraged. All right. Uh, and secondly, it's just the pressure to publish. Both points I think are fair. All right. But but the point is that you yourself as an individual researcher, once you make it past that pressure point of publication, right? Once you make it past that point of publication, you have to think about where your research is going to lie, or how it's going to be remembered, right? And that's what the point of this session is, to help you think about it in that way, right? And think about how you want to communicate it in the future, or at least start planning the communication of that research in the future. At least think about it a little further, because it doesn't make sense if it just lies within the pages of a journal itself, right? And secondly, yes, it's rarely encouraged because in India still, we do have limitations on funding, and I think that's largely why it's discouraged, right? If you had, say, a certain amount of money, and you could choose between buying more equipment or reagents versus promoting science through PR agency, your PI would probably tell you to go ahead and buy the equipment and the reagents, because that's something you're going to use directly. The value is not inherently clear always, right? But in terms of reach, in terms of career progression, in terms of presence, it makes more sense to promote research. It does make sense to promote research, because if you promote research, the future funding will come. It will happen. Because when you submit that application along with hundreds of others, the fact that your science has had a real world impact, the fact that your science is reachable, it's more inclusive, in the long run will benefit you more, right? So again, it's just some food for thought. It's not something that you have to go back with and decide today that no, I'm going to spend more time with research communication and research promotion. That's not the point. The point is, yeah, you focus solely on your publication first. Let that be your first focus. But once that publication cycle finishes, think about the future. Think about what needs to happen next, because that's important. You can't just move on to the next project. Think about how you want to promote research. So yeah, in terms of publishers, just again switching back to publishers and societies who are investing now in science communication in different formats, they want to attract more submissions. Like I said, they want to engage in improve engagement with the different stakeholders that they have. And yes, all of them are looking to improve their brand value as well. All of us know nature, right? Because nature is unique in its own way. The way it does things is very stylish. The way it does things is very kind of, it seems like a different level altogether, which is why we all want to publish a paper in Nature at some point in time, right? Everybody aspires to that because of what nature does. It's built a fantastic brand value, and it's happened because of the way they communicate science. Nature is excellent at taking the content that is published in its journals and then repurposing it into different formats in its blog and its different channels. And that's what makes sort of nature like a thought leader in its field of scientific publishing itself, right? Yes, these are the reasons as to why publishers and societies invest in uh, communicating science in alternative formats. And then of course there is altmetrics. Okay, so how many of you have heard of altmetric? Maybe don't look at my slide right now. How many of you have heard of altmetric if you're listening to me? Okay. So you guys know, okay, so you guys know impact factor, right? Everybody knows impact factor, right? How is impact factor calculated? I mean, how does a journal's impact factor kind of improve, right? Journal's impact factor improves if, say, the paper that has been published in a particular journal gets cited again and again and again and again, right? And then the impact factor of that journal sort of improves, right? In addition to impact factor, there's another bibliometric, which is citation index. How many of you have heard of citation index? You've heard of citation index as well, right? So again, exactly. So citation index exists as well. But the thing with these is that they're very retrospective, very retroactive. I would say very retroactive, because you publish and then can anybody tell me how many years it takes on average for a citation to happen? Do you guys have any idea? So the right answer is anywhere between 1 and 3 years for the life sciences, depending on the impact of the paper, by the way. Huh? Anywhere between 1 and 3 years. If you're in the physical sciences, it can go up to 5 years. In some fields of the humanities, it goes up to 7 years for a citation. All right. And certain very niche fields don't have very high citations at all, actually. So these things take years, right? It takes years. It takes at least a year after your publication to see a citation of your study, correct? That would be appropriate, right? So by the time the impact of your study is seen, you've already lost time, right? So altmetric kind of came up as a real-time tracker of impact. Altmetric is just more real-time. It's a real-time way of analyzing the outreach of scientific papers. And how does that happen? Altmetric works by tracking the mentions of a paper through its DOI, okay, on social media, in the news, anywhere. If the paper is mentioned anywhere on the internet, if it features on a blog, anywhere, if anybody talks about a particular study, then it gets an altmetric, it adds to the altmetric score. All right. And if you get an altmetric score of say plus 100 after your paper has been published, that means it's doing really well. And why altmetric is really popular these days is because it's a real time. It can tell you in the first couple of months as to how important your study has been. Right. And when you get an altmetric score, and if you notice, if you go to say, for example, right now, as I'm talking to you, I encourage you, open say open say scientific reports, open scientific reports. All right. I think beside the paper itself, the journal now mentions the altmetric score. And the altmetric score actually shows you how many times the paper is being mentioned in the internet, on social media, whether it's being picked up by the news. All right. And the really important papers, for example, that Oxford AstraZeneca paper that I showed you at the start of this webinar, right? I think that has that altmetric score in the several hundreds. All right. So altmetric is basically a real-time way. It's a real-time way of being able to track the impact of your paper, essentially. And it's important because, like I said, more and more journals realize now that they can't wait for citations to happen. It takes too long for them to really show the impact, right? So a lot of people kind of depend on altmetric, right? A lot of people depend on altmetric to kind of gauge the impact of a paper. And having a high altmetric score on your paper is now starting to become a strong indicator of how impactful your study has been in a particular field. And like I said, the altmetric is affected by the pickup of a paper. Pickup is where it gets picked up and sort of mentioned in social media and things like that, right? And it generally helps. It generally helps. So Anuradha has an interesting question. How do you find the altmetric score of a paper? You can mention altmetric in the CV now. You can mention. I've seen a lot of people mention altmetric scores in their CVs now. How can you find the altmetric score of a paper? You have to go to their website, Anuradha, altmetric's website, and then insert the DOI of the paper or the title of the paper, and it will give you the actual altmetric score. It will give you the score and it will mention some of the key specifics. So Anshuman has a question as to what can be considered a good altmetric score. I would say anything above 75, 80 is a good altmetric score, right? Some really great papers I've seen altmetric scores of up to 700 in some cases. Again, that was one of the vaccine papers for COVID-19. So yeah. Okay. Do journals have dedicated teams that help authors create more accessible videos? Not all the time, Snehal. Not all the time. That's not something that happens all the time. So anyway, I'm going to move on to our next. I'm going to move on with the webinar where I'll keep answering questions. We will, yeah, we will sort of circle back to these when we have the joint question section. So anyway, coming back to this, how is altmetric effective? Altmetric is effective when somebody picks up your paper and talks about it. That is really, really critical, right? And how fast is all of this catching up with research? Like some of you are saying, can I mention altmetric in my CV? Of course you can, along with impact factor. Mention impact factor, mention citation index, because those are still good indicators, right? Those are still the traditionally accepted indicators. But mention altmetric as well, right? Because altmetric works as well. Yeah. Altmetric scores associated only with the paper, not with the researcher, right? Yeah. And of course, how soon are they catching up? Catching up pretty soon. Look at this stuff that the Royal Society of Chemistry puts out, right? And this is another journal called Pain, right? They all convert papers into sort of infographic, yeah. And yeah, they all also invest in videos and video creation to sort of simplify the papers that you're looking at, and especially in fields like, say, surgery, right, where the target audience of say surgeons who read the paper, they don't have much time, right? So a lot of medical journals invest in creating videos because they want people to just glance at the video for like 3 minutes and understand what the gist of the study is, right? So yeah, my point is that all of this is catching up with us very, very soon. It's happening very, very soon, right? So that's something that you should be aware of, and that's why I'm saying, think of the publication, but beyond publication, think of it further, think of the promotion further, right? So how do you use non-traditional formats of communicating research? The first is, of course, get into the habit of tweeting about your research. All right, get into the habit of tweeting about research. Get into the habit of, I don't know how many of you have done this. I wish I had back in the day when I was a researcher. But if you want to go ahead and share some of your, so again, do this after publication. Don't do anything before publication, please. Right? Share an image from your study, what has been published. Share that image on Instagram. Share a graphical abstract along with your published paper on, say, Facebook. Right? So I think that's something that's really, really kind of that would be really, really interesting. And of course, LinkedIn is a great place to just go ahead and just write up about what you've done, what your research journey has been like. I had a friend who recently wrote a really long post about what their PhD thesis was about, and they put a nice video about what they studied, and it garnered a lot of views and a lot of reactions. And that's a good way to just engage with people and build your network on social media as well, right? So yeah, so Murli, I think that's a nice point. The downside could also be a boost in sort of a catchy sounding finding. Yes, of course. But the point of this session is to kind of talk to you guys about how to make your research sound catchy, right? So it's hopefully by the end of this, you will think about how you can make your research sound catchy as well, so that it gets sort of picked up, right? Of course, sometimes the research doesn't lead to anything, and it can be a catchy title that gets people to places, but again, at the end of the day, the question is, it's about being able to communicate that effectively. And yes, I would encourage all of you now, because today's session, I mean, the next half of this session is going to talk about how to, write for popular science, or write science for popular media, or write your science in a manner that helps it sort of appeal to popular media. I just want to tell you guys, this is a very simple exercise that you have to do. Start maintaining a blog of some sort, in a simple language. Just maintain a very nice blog of your work. You don't have to share it with anybody. You don't have to put it up anywhere, right? Creating a blog is free. Just get into the habit of chronicling the work you do. All right, it's very important from many perspectives, but just in terms of your writing itself, and this is one of the most common things that people one of the most common things that people bring up. Okay, they ask me like, how do I improve my writing? How do I get better at writing? You get better at writing by firstly reading and then, of course, writing a lot, right? So maintaining a blog is a great way of constantly writing. It's a great way of constantly staying in touch, right? And the more you write, the better you'll get at it, right? And of course, the key is, yeah, the key is to kind of reach out when you can. If your institute has a press officer, which I've seen in some cases, if your institute has a press officer, to engage with them, to talk about your research, to not just let it, be something that only, big PIs in institution, big, PIs in an institution would benefit from. Even you should probably be engaged in thinking about how your science needs to be communicated, right? So yeah, how can you benefit from this? Shares, retweets, all of this is really good. Will help you a lot. It'll help your papers auth metrics, right? And these are some examples of researchers who do it really well. So on your left-hand side, you can see an example from Frontiers, right? On the right-hand side, you can actually see a Nobel laureates page, right? Yeah, so I think quite a few of you are asking about infographics. All right. I think my colleague in the next will just in the next session will just briefly talk about them, right? But if you guys want a separate session on infographics and how they're created, what the basics of it are, etc., maybe that's something you can request for in the future, right? And we'd be more than happy to talk to you about it separately, right? Yeah, so look at the example on the right hand side. This is like a Facebook page of a Nobel laureate. Of course, it's a Nobel laureate. It's a very high standard to kind of think about and reach, but you should think about it. You should think about it. If I were you as a researcher today, I would have a separate sort of Facebook page just talks about my research. I'd have a separate Facebook research account. Like I'd just talk about research findings. That'll be like my professional Facebook account. If I was putting something on my CV, I'd put that as my as like a Facebook, as like a social media link for people to find out how these things, to just put that on my CV to just let people know that this is how I think about my science and this is how I communicate my science. It's a great way of doing it. So again, another small thing you can do, think about creating a Facebook page just to talk about your research, right? And of course, like I mentioned, REF, the Research Excellence Framework in the UK, it's very important now for researchers, at least in that geography, to constantly sort of including, right, to constantly talk about the impact of research. Otherwise, part of your funding doesn't get reduced. So this is why there is a real need to communicate research in an inclusive manner for all people, right? So what does all this mean? Said quite a lot now, right? What does all this mean? What this means is, right, it is now more important than ever to communicate your research effectively, right? And this is where we come to the meat and drink of my presentation itself, right? So I am going to talk about one format today, one format, because I don't want to kind of cloud your head with a lot of different things and ideas. I just want to give you something simple that you can take away, right, and be able to apply after this presentation, after this webinar. I don't want you to think about it beyond that. I don't want you to kind of give you multiple different ideas, right? So I'm just going to talk to you about the scientific press release / research news story. Okay. If you know how to write a research news story, you'll be able to write a plain language summary for your study. All right. I think that will also be possible, right? Okay. So just before I move to that, somebody, Jyoti asks, is science drama, if science drama is impactful to reach out to those who don't know science technically? Yes, absolutely. That is true. If being able to, communicate in that manner, it would work. I have done a few in the past when I was in college. It was a good way of talking about certain things, and in particular, being able to communicate science. Certain fields doing it in this manner works better than others. For example, climate change is one which adopts this format quite a lot. All right, but you wouldn't see it happening in things like biochemistry, for example, or molecular biology, or physics, for example. It's very difficult to communicate that. those aspects. Getting back to the slide, I will be talking to you folks about the scientific press release and the research news story, or the research news story. If you can figure out how to do this correctly, if you're able to do this bit correctly, you will be able to summarize your science pretty well. All right. So now, moving on. Do any of us need a break at all? Just asking everybody. No? Okay, you keep going. Fantastic. Okay, I'm just gonna look into a sip of coffee. All right. Cool. What is a scientific press release? How many of you grew up reading the science column in the Times of India? It was the page right opposite the editorial. It was, yeah, it's just after the economics bit. I mean, just before the economics bit. I mean, I read the newspaper backwards. I used to always read the sports section first and then move to the center, to the front page. So yeah, it's the section just before the economic section. There you go. Ayush knows it. Page number 11, right? Those articles that were written, okay, those were, I think, in my opinion, some of my first interaction with scientific discovery. Those were my first interaction with scientific discovery. Oh, scientists find this new thing, or wearing 2 masks may not entirely help you avoid COVID. What is that? What is that article? That article is nothing but a research news story. That is a research news story. Someone taking an actual legitimate research paper that has been published in a scientific journal and converting it into a research news story, into something that can be read in a newspaper and understood by a large audience. And then what it does, what a research news story does essentially, right? It summarizes the research paper in a newsy, non-academic style for pickup through various news portals, right? And it describes the broad applications of, right? It's got broad applications of the research impact and the motivation of conducting research, all from the author's perspective. Now, whether you realize it or not, all research news stories have the same format. They all have the same format. They will all have a similar structure. Just like another thing that you're used to, which is the research paper. The research paper, all research papers have the same format. Can we agree on that? All original research articles, I'm not talking about review papers and stuff, yeah? All research papers have the same format. Abstract, introduction, methods, discussion, results, discussion, conclusion, more or less, yes. Right? So similarly, even a scientific press release, now I want you to think about it the same way. It has the same structure, right? And I will show you that, right? So, but before that, why are scientific press releases effective? They're effective because they're a powerful tool for worldwide dissemination, right? Everybody, like, you do a scientific press release, your altmetric score will jump. It will jump. I'll tell you from experience. We have, in my case, right? I kind of do press releases for a particular. I write press. We help write press notes for a particular university. Their altmetric score at least triples. It at least triples each time they do a press release. So it's one excellent way to do kind of boost your altmetric score. Secondly, it provides immense traction and publicity for the researcher. It opens avenues for collaboration and funding in a researcher's case. It helps with profile building, and it can be accompanied by graphics easily. You don't have to put up the image from your study. You can pick up just a free stock image of the internet and put it on the news story, and that's good enough to go, right? And of course, like I said, all metrics, so it boosts incredibly. Then, what goes into a good press release, right? So let's move to an annotated example, okay? And I am going to start with sharing a handout with you guys. 1 second. Right. Right, so I'm going to share my screen. Right, just let me know once my screen is visible to you folks, yeah? Can you folks see my screen? If you can see titanium as an instant adhesive for biological soft tissue, then I think, yeah. Right? So uh, is this really kind of easy to understand? Can you guys read this abstract and tell me what this paper is about? Okay, you can't, right? Titanium as an adhesive in surgery. Okay, all right. Okay, polymer characteristics. Okay, so this was actually a very interesting. What do you call it? So this was a very interesting. Okay, so some of you understood it. I'd give that to you. Some of you definitely understood it. Okay, but those of you who understood it, do you think it was easy to understand? Can you guys say it's easy to understand at least? Can we agree on that? Not immediately. Yeah, you'd read it a couple of times, right? Yeah, you'd read it a couple of times, right? So then I'll give you an example, right? So this was an author who told me that he has experience of writing his own press release. So he came back and I gave him a template, right? I gave him a template to write his own press release, and he came to me with this. Let's read this. The main body bit. Is this any better? No, right? Slightly simpler, right? No. Okay, so then, okay, now I'm going to ask everybody on this webinar one question. Okay, I'm going to ask everybody one question. Uh, can you, in one word, can you tell me in one word what this paper is about? Bioadhesive, biological glue. Okay. Now, if I had a handout like a chocolate to throw at people, then I would say if you said the word suture or surgery, you'd be right because that's what the paper is about. That's what the paper is about. It's about creating a different type of surgical suture, right? And this is what we came up with. This is what we wrote. And I have taken this example and I've given you very simple annotations on what goes into a press release or writing. Because if you learn how to write a press release, again, I'm reiterating, you learn how to write a press release, you'll be able to write a plain language summary easily, no problem whatsoever, right? Right. So somebody had spoken about a catchy title. Look at this. Stuck to you like titanium glue. A novel adhesive for biological tissue to replace sutures. Right? What's the first key towards writing a nice so-called summary for your study? You have to write a simple, catchy title, right? Draw the attention of the reader, right? Without turning them to technical terms. Right. So for example, all right, I used to study the dehiscence of rice, right? And I was trying to kind of manipulate a proteomic pathway to make sure that it sort of dehisces faster, which would enhance sort of harvest time. So what I would say, what I would perhaps phrase that as is, all right, scientists find a way to make faster harvesting rice, right? And then once you've written the first title, you write a small one sentence summary of your study, one sentence summary, right? In that one sentence summary, this is generally the basically the subtitle that follows the title, which kind of leads you onto the paper. So here you say scientists develop a new titanium fill for biological tissue as a revolutionary alternative to surgical suture. Right. Then Then the third paragraph, okay, the catchy title, one sentence summary of your paper in a very nice so-called, succinct manner, followed by a single paragraph, right, which gives you a short background of the study with the significance of the study, right? Sutures are widely used to seal surgical wounds. So background, why the study? Okay, so sutures are important, right? We need sutures for surgery, right? But they have a high risk of infection. Automatically, the first sentence, it doesn't go into what has happened with sutures, traditionally nothing. None of that. It goes straight to the point, says sutures are used in surgery, but they have a high risk of infection when you use them, right? Now, while tissues, right, tissue adhesives can stick the skin back together, they come with their own drawbacks, right? So, for example, if you have a really big gash on your body is not able to stick the skin back together again. That's why you need sutures, right? So then, in 2 lines, I have given people why they should care. The first question you should ask yourself is, why should somebody care about my research? Why should they care about my research? Right? And your answer to that question is the background for your press release. Why should someone care about my research? The answer to that is the background of your press release. Right? Then you say scientists at this particular university have discovered this. Right? So why should people care? First question. Second question, what have I discovered? In one sentence, what have I discovered? Right? And when I say one sentence, I don't mean a 3-line sentence. I mean one sentence, right? A 1-line sentence, right? What have I discovered, right? And what are the benefits of what I've discovered? Yes, Lavangi, we will be sharing all of this with everybody, right? So that is your opening to your press release. So 3 questions. Why should people care? What have I discovered? What are the benefits of what I've discovered? 3 questions. Answer 3 questions. You have your first paragraph, right? Then you write a sort of a general non-technical thing which talks about, what your views are on a particular thing, or what your views are on the background of your study. Not in the way that it's been presented in a scientific paper. Not in the way it's been presented in a scientific paper, right? It has to have a conversational tone. It has to have a conversational tone. Don't use the passive voice. Don't use the passive voice. Yeah? Passive voice, we use it when we write papers, right? But in general, people absorb information better when we use the active voice, which is why a lot of journals are switching to active voice, right? Don't write in passive voice. It's very difficult for somebody to understand. It drags everything on a lot more, right? And that makes it difficult. So use the active voice. I hope some of you are taking notes on this. Use the active voice when writing, right? So with the exponential growth medical technology, okay, however, surgical techniques are increasingly standardized and are, sutures to this day, right? Sutures to this day remain so-called, rudimentary. Nothing much has happened, right? It's time-consuming. It's dependent on skill, and inadequately completed stitch has high cause of damaging tissue, right? So this makes you wonder if there's some way to stick the skin back together without needle and a thread, right? So Chinmoy, whether you should switch to the active voice for the journal, that depends on your journal, by the way. Some journals are very specific about the voice they want in the paper. But generally, when we are taught to write scientific papers, they tell us to write in passive, especially with the results and the discussion. That's okay for your publication. But when you write a summary, don't write in passive. It's not a good idea. It then drags it on unnecessarily, right? So yeah, it's a continuation of the introduction that we talk about here with drawbacks to current techniques, right? So we want to leave the reader with a thought in their mind about why the current method is inadequate or needs replacement or revision, right? Finally, what do you call it? This is where we talk about another piece of information that the author knows, right? And we want to basically just take them on to another point, right? So fortunately, there are actual skin glues, but they're not preferred because they don't kind of stick the skin together quite well. And here it goes into a bit of jargon about the different kinds of skin glues that are available to stick the skin together, right? In the case of a surgery, right? And then it talks about how titanium, which is used in things like, you know, which is used in things like dentistry, all right, and is biocompatible, right? Whether titanium could form the basis of a suture, right? And to answer this question, here is where the talk about your study actually starts. You introduce the reader to why or how you arrived at this particular, how you arrived at that particular solution to the problem. How that, what made you think about that particular solution? What made you think about that particular, what made you think about that particular solution to that research problem? Right. So you talk about the solution to your research problem here first, right? And then you move into talking about how you went about finding the solution yourself directly, right? Here you go a bit into the methods themselves, right? And these comments are pretty self-explanatory in terms of how you need to, like I said, in the methods, don't go into detail. Nobody is going to really want to understand exactly what you did, right? But you can talk about it a bit to add a bit of legitimacy to what was done, right? It's good to always talk about it, but they don't want to know how you did something. They want to know what you did or what you found, right? So your first focus has to be what you found and not how you found it. They don't want to, in science, we have to, the how matters. But for the public, what matters? The question, what is what matters, right? Of course, make it a point of hyperlink your paper while you write about it, right? And here is where, in a very, right, here is where you make it sort of, here is where you just talk about the method again, and here is where you summarize the findings. You talk about the results here, right? You lead on from the methods to the results, and here you talk about the conclusion in the general format, and then you end with a quote from you. So whatever quote you have, you talk about. So again, title, subtitle, broad summary, all right, background, right? Then you move into method, only a paragraph, result, only a paragraph, and your conclusion, only a paragraph. You don't have space to discuss, right? You don't have space to discuss really a lot. So you only want to talk about, like I said, just the background, one paragraph for the methods, one paragraph for results, and the conclusion. That's it. And then you give them a quote. And that's how you essentially put a press release together. That's how you put a press release or even a plain language summary together, right? I think Dereshwar has a question saying, do you also need to make the public understand the limitations of the research in the press releases and how? You can, but I would suggest you do that through the quote. You don't have to spend time or like kind of dedicate space, because again, for a press release, you generally not encouraged to write more than 600, 700 words, not more, and that also is too much. Huh? So the thing is, the press release is generally this long because I want a journalist to pick it up. So I want to give them as much information as possible. When a journalist looks at it, he is probably going to use only 300 words from this entire thing. I am the one who's giving him so much information, right? So you stick to around 600 words. Generally, don't write more than 600 words. And like I said, what exactly is a press release? Okay, a press release is where you take a scientific summary like this, a scientific sort of news story like this, and then you make it available to journalists to pick it up and run the story on their newspaper. And you do this by posting it on platforms like Eureka Alert. Eureka Alert is basically a repository of scientific, basically research stories, and journalists keep coming to this resource. Sorry, journalists keep coming to this resource. It's called Eureka Alert. It's owned by the American, yeah, everybody. Direct alert is one. And then you have something called phys.org, which is for physics. Right. So these are where you go ahead and post these, right? You post your press releases here, and somebody picks it up. They pick it up and then they run it in the news. And when they run it in the news, your study gets it sort of gets picked up. And as recently as yesterday, one of the press releases that we did for somebody, it got picked up by the Guardian in the United Kingdom. So, like I said, that's where journalists come to look for all these things, right? So yeah, so this basically forms the basis of your press release, right? Now, your question you're asking me is right now, okay, so Shane, you've given me all of this information on how to write it, you give me a handout, but how do I know, how do I know if, how do I know if my writing is too, it's too convoluted? How do I know this? How am I going to know about this, right? So this is where I'd like to maybe introduce you to a nice, fun little tool called the Hemingway app, right? So I'm just going to share my screen again, right? Just let me know once you can. Let me know once you guys can see my screen again. So this is the Hemingway app. It's a really cool app which tells you whether your writing is too convoluted or not. All right. So yeah, so I'm gonna share an example with you folks right now. So let's look at this. What do you call it? Let's look at the scientists' press release. Yeah. Let's see. This is what they wrote. Right. This is their summary. I'm picking it up, and I'm just going to put it on the app here. And what this app does is it gives you like a wonderful score. See this? Can you see the number of reds here? Right. This means that this is not easy to understand at all. And if you actually put so the readability is around 13, which is something that maybe a graduate or a postgraduate will understand. Right. But say, for example, I'll pick up this, right? And it's quite long, much longer. I don't want it to pick up the comments as well. Just give me a second. So let's pick up some of this. Picking up everything. Right. You can go to the Hemingway app. Oh, oops. Yeah. It needs a bit more. I need to maybe split it up a little bit and make it sort of easier to understand. How is it different compared to Grammarly? That's a good question. Grammarly basically helps you with, it helps you kind of more with the, what do you call it? Grammarly helps you with essentially the missing commas and the sentence clauses and things. This just tells you whether you have too many convoluted, long sentences in your writing. That's where it's sort of useful. That's what makes it sort of easier to kind of understand. So you can use the Hemingway app when you write, all right, to go ahead and just understand whether your sentences is too long or not, whether you need to split it up into short sort of sentences. And in my opinion, the best possible, yeah, the app is free. In my opinion, and I still do this. My best test is something that they call the grandma test. All right, where you kind of write something down, you write a summary down. All right, you write a summary down and you kind of read it to your grandmother or you read it to somebody else in your family, all right, who has no clue. And if they're able to understand what you've said just by reading it out, right, they will kind of, then your summary is probably good enough to kind of go to the public, right? And so I think quite a few questions about, is the app free? The app is free. What should we use to cross-check grammar? I think Microsoft Word does a fairly decent job of helping you check the grammar of your paper. of your writing. In addition to that, there's of course Grammarly. Grammarly will flag a bunch of things. Grammarly is a paid application. All right, you're not going to get all the features of Grammarly just through just by using the free version. It's going to highlight something that want to help you. So if you really want the benefits of Grammarly, you should probably buy the subscription. Then maybe it will make sense. But I don't know. I don't know how affordable it might be for an individual researcher, right? I think okay, yeah. No, so Word doesn't really highlight sort of so-called long sentences. It'll only maybe tell you to simplify things. It's very limited functionality, but having it just gives you a good idea in terms of readability. At least judges your readability pretty well, right? So yeah. Now moving on, right? So you've seen all of that, and I've shown you how an annotated example. Let me show you an example that you cannot forget when it comes to writing a press release. Okay, have a look at this. This is a nice example. It's a nice example of what actually goes into a press release. Dinu, yes, your researchers can directly post on Eureka Alert, but I would suggest that your institution buy the account or your institution subscribe to it first. So can you read it? It's quite funny actually. Yeah, sure. I will get all of this. Don't worry. So this is like I said, when I read this, like I can't forget how to write a press release. I'm serious. Like you keep this handy. Every time you have to write it, you come across this. So you have to, of course, temper the humor with a bit of seriousness, but this is a great way to remember how to write a press release. So yeah. Yeah, so in the interest of time, I'm going to move forward. I think I already overshot my time, right? So I just have a bit more to go. Right, so I'll share this with you guys. Don't worry, you'll get all of this, and the presentation is being recorded as well, so you'll know, right? So yeah, just remember this, just to kind of recap everything, and for you to remember the inverted pyramid. Okay, you start with the lead. What's the most important information? Who, what, where, why? Have a hook. Okay, the body is crucial, and give the extra information on the tail. Right, this is very important. So I will go with this. If you think about the structure of a scientific paper, for example, that is an hourglass, right? You start broad, then you narrow, and then you go broad again. No, you don't do that here with the press release. You kind of start broad, and you narrow, and you give like important, you get extra information only at the bottom. Put the most important information at the start, because people's attention spans these days is not more than, what do you call it? Not more than 15 seconds, right? You know, it's not more than 15 seconds. We're in the whole Instagram Reels society now, right? With, of course, TikTok is now banned. So people don't have much of an attention span. So put whatever somebody needs to know, put it right at the start, right? And then if they're interested, give them more information, right? So think of it in that way when you write. And of course, this is just an example of some press releases that have been done for papers that we've done recently. And yeah, and you can see here what the altmetric score looks like. Here as well, another one. Again, another indication of the altmetric score. And there are different formats to a press release. I mean, to the press release, or the press release is the most technical one. So if you know how to write this, then a plain language summary is very simple in that case. You just have to, you can just get rid of the title and that opening paragraph. Everything else, I think, you can keep, and you have a plain language summary more or less. All right. And then, of course, you have the news type press release, and then you have something that you call the short form, where a journal will make you summarize the entire article into like 700, 750 words. The Journal of Neurology does this now. They ask authors to kind of request they kind of request authors to write this and sort of submit it to them these days. Yeah. And of course, these are the platforms on which you host press releases. And Kirti asks, how do you request for a press release? You request for a press release, you generally have to speak to your PI about that, or whoever your, and then as a lab, you decide to put the information out in the news, right? That's where the conversation essentially starts, right? So yeah, and yeah, these are the various platforms which you put these up. You put up these press releases or your plain language summaries, and hope for sort of research, sort of journalists to come back and sort of pick them up. So, yep, this is yeah. I think that brings me to an end. And researchers are extremely happy when it's done for them, right? This is somebody who I helped a couple of years ago actually, and it opened a bunch of different doors for him in terms of collaborators and things like that. Things like that. His phone wouldn't stop ringing after his so-called study was, picked up by the news and things like that. So, again, it's because he thought about what to do after publication. He thought about that next step. And I think that's what made it critical. So, it's not just about publication. You have to think about research, communication, right? And that is where I will end my webinar for today. So thank you everybody for joining us, right? It was incredible kind of answering all your questions. At some points I found it difficult to keep up, but yeah, thank you. And I'll be back to answer some of your questions later. And I'll hand over to Hina now. Thanks.
It was a wonderful presentation. I could see it from the audience response as well. I wish I had somebody tell me all this when I was in PhD. So thank you again. With this, we take a quick 5-minute screen break. It's 11:30 sharp. So we'll get back at 11:35. Thank you.